Who decides when faith becomes dangerous? Who draws the line between obedience and extremism, between courage and recklessness, between holiness and heresy? History loves simple labels, but faith never lived in simple categories. Somewhere between pulpits and prisons, between hymns and silence, a question still burns beneath the surface of modern Christianity. What kind of faith makes people uncomfortable enough to call it dangerous? Stay with that question, because it refuses to stay buried. There was a time when Bonhoeffer was not quoted, admired, or safely framed in sermons. There was a time when his words did not decorate bookshelves, but disturbed consciences. He did not challenge unbelievers first. He challenged the church, and that alone was enough to turn admiration into suspicion. Because when faith stops blessing comfort and starts demanding obedience, it no longer feels holy, it feels hostile. What if the very traits we celebrate today would have made us reject him then? The church prefers saints who fit neatly into memory, not voices that interrupt the present. Bonhoeffer refused to become harmless. He spoke of grace that costs, of obedience that wounds pride, of faith that cannot coexist with moral convenience. To some, this sounded like faithfulness. To others, it sounded like betrayal. And here lies the tension we rarely confront. When obedience threatens stability, does the church still recognize it as obedience at all? Bonhoeffer believed that silence can be sin, that neutrality can become complicity, and that faith detached from action slowly rots into ideology. These ideas did not make him popular, they made him suspect, because a faith that demands action exposes a church that prefers safety. A faith that insists on truth reveals how comfortable we have become with half-truths, and a faith willing to suffer unmasks how deeply we fear losing approval. So the question remains unresolved, hanging heavy in the air you are breathing right now. Was Bonhoeffer a hero shaped by history, or a threat rejected by his own people? The answer is not found in biographies or memorials. It is found in the quiet place where your faith meets cost, risk, and obedience. And before this journey ends, you may discover that the most unsettling part of Bonhoeffer's story is not what it says about him, but what it reveals about us. There is a moment in every honest faith when certainty begins to thin, when words once spoken with confidence start returning with weight, hesitation, and unanswered echoes. It is not the loud collapse people imagine when they think of crisis. It is quieter than that, more intimate, a subtle shift in the soul where belief still exists, but conviction no longer burns. Dietrich Bonhoeffer lived inside that moment long before it had language, long before doubt became something acceptable to confess. He sensed that something fundamental had changed inside the church, not through rebellion, not through denial, but through comfort. Comfort is rarely seen as a threat. It arrives gently, almost kindly, offering relief from tension, offering peace without struggle. Bonhoeffer saw how belief slowly entered into an unspoken agreement with convenience. Faith learned how to survive without courage, how to remain intact without obedience, how to function without sacrifice. And once that agreement is made, faith no longer needs depth to persist. It only needs repetition. Routine becomes righteousness. Familiarity replaces truth. What disturbed him most was not open resistance to God, but silent compliance with the moment. A church that learned how to adapt without resisting, how to speak without risking, how to survive without obeying. He watched spiritual language soften moral edges, watched scripture quoted without being followed, watched God praised while truth was delayed for a more convenient time. Everything appeared stable, peaceful, reasonable, and that apparent calm became the warning itself. Because when faith no longer disrupts life, it begins quietly transforming into something else. Faith, Bonhoeffer understood, does not vanish overnight. It erodes, slowly, invisibly. It trades obedience for acceptance, sacrifice for relevance, truth for stability. No announcement is made, no warning siren sounds. Churches still gather, Hymns are still sung, sermons still feel familiar, but something essential has gone missing beneath the surface. And the most unsettling truth is this: almost no one notices while it is happening, because erosion does not announce itself. It simply continues. Once this erosion becomes visible, it cannot be unseen. The tension begins to grow between what is spoken and what is lived, between what is preached and what is practiced. Silence starts to weigh more than words. To remain quiet feels safer, more reasonable, less divisive. But safety, Bonhoeffer believed, is not the same as faithfulness. And it was precisely at this crossroads, where safety and obedience no longer pointed in the same direction, that his life began to narrow. Bonhoeffer believed that faith is not proven by words spoken in protected spaces, but by decisions made when obedience carries real consequences, not symbolic consequences, not hypothetical ones, real loss, real isolation, and this belief unsettled people deeply, because it exposed an uncomfortable truth most would rather avoid. Many had learned to love a version of Christianity that never demanded anything irreversible, a faith that fit neatly into life, rather than one that rearranged it from the inside out. This kind of faith feels safe. It allows reflection without risk, belief without surrender, conviction without cost. Bonhoeffer refused that version, quietly, consistently. And refusal, when lived without anger or spectacle, can feel more threatening than rebellion, because it offers no enemy to fight, only a mirror. His life suggested that much of what was called patience was actually avoidance, and much of what was called wisdom was simply delay. To many, his convictions sounded excessive, unnecessary, even dangerous. They asked why he could not wait, why he could not compromise, why he could not remain patient until circumstances improved. Why disturb peace when stability seemed possible? But Bonhoeffer recognized something sharper beneath those questions. Peace without truth is not peace. It is postponement, avoidance dressed in virtue, and faith that survives only by delaying responsibility eventually becomes incapable of acting when responsibility arrives. This is where the question begins to sharpen, no longer as a historical debate, but as a personal confrontation. Because his life forces a decision that cannot remain theoretical. What kind of faith do we instinctively protect, and what kind do we quietly distrust? The faith that comforts us, or the faith that calls us forward? The faith that affirms who we already are, or the faith that interrupts us where we feel most secure? Bonhoeffer's understanding of obedience was never abstract or poetic. It was lived, embodied, and costly. Obedience meant acting before certainty arrived, choosing truth before outcomes were guaranteed, remaining faithful even when the path forward dissolved into silence. This kind of faith does not attract applause. It attracts suspicion, and suspicion, once formed, has a way of isolating those who refuse to retreat. Suspicion grows wherever obedience removes the safety net of intention and replaces it with responsibility. Responsibility is frightening because it exposes how often we hide behind complexity to avoid commitment. Bonhoeffer saw how easily reflection could replace action, how discussion could masquerade as discipleship, how endless analysis could become a refuge from obedience. He did not reject thought. He rejected thought that never moved toward faithfulness, thought that circled endlessly without ever landing in action. He watched how people learned to speak passionately about truth while avoiding the moment where truth demands something concrete. How moral clarity could be endlessly discussed but rarely embodied. In this way, faith slowly became performative, intelligent, articulate, but inert. Bonhoeffer's life disrupted that illusion, not through accusation, but through consistency. And consistency is difficult to argue with. It simply stands there, quietly refusing to move. As he lived this conviction more clearly, the space around him grew narrower. Truth, when lived consistently, compresses the room. It leaves fewer excuses, fewer hiding places behind collective agreement. Bonhoeffer did not shout. He did not posture. He did not dramatize his convictions. He simply refused to adjust his conscience to match the comfort of the moment. And that quiet refusal unsettled everyone who depended on flexibility to survive. This is why he resists easy categories. Heroes are celebrated because they affirm shared narratives. Villains are rejected because they threaten them. Bonhoeffer did neither cleanly. He disrupted the narrative itself. He revealed that the real conflict was not between belief and unbelief, but between obedience and comfort, between truth admired and truth lived. And that distinction remains deeply uncomfortable, because it suggests that admiration can coexist with disobedience, that quoting the right voices can replace following them. Bonhoeffer understood that being remembered is far easier than being obeyed. History could eventually embrace his image, but his faith would always remain inconvenient. His life presses an unavoidable question into the present moment. Not whether he was right or wrong, but whether we would have trusted him while he lived, whether we would have recognized obedience when it did not look like success, whether we would have stood beside him or quietly distanced ourselves for the sake of unity, peace, and reputation. These questions are uncomfortable because they do not belong safely in the past. Faith that carries no risk feels reassuring. It feels mature, balanced. Faith that carries cost feels destabilizing. It disrupts routines, relationships, and self-images. And when faith destabilizes, it exposes how much we rely on stability to feel righteous. Bonhoeffer did not attack the church from outside. He unsettled it from within. And that internal disruption is always more dangerous than opposition. The deeper one moves into his thinking, the clearer it becomes that the real threat was never political, ideological, or historical. It was moral clarity, a clarity that refuses to wait for permission, a clarity that acts before consensus forms, a clarity that obeys even when obedience isolates. That kind of clarity does not blend easily into institutions built on caution, and now the spiral tightens further. Because the story no longer belongs to Bonhoeffer alone. It presses inward, toward quiet decisions no one sees, toward compromises we justify, toward silences we explain away, toward the moments when faith asks for more than reflection, more than agreement, more than admiration. The tension he lived inside has not disappeared. It has only changed its language. And somewhere between comfort and obedience, between safety and truth, the same question waits patiently, unresolved, pressing closer, not demanding an answer yet, but refusing to be ignored. What remains after this journey is not an answer, but a tension that refuses to dissolve. Like a bell still vibrating long after it has been struck, the questions linger in the quiet spaces where certainty once lived. Bonhoeffer's life does not resolve our doubts, it sharpens them. It reminds us that faith is not something we settle, but something that unsettles us. That truth is not proven by how clearly we can explain it, but by how deeply it rearranges us. And perhaps the most honest measure of faith is not whether it makes us feel secure, but whether it makes us attentive, awake, and unwilling to return unchanged. Some truths do not arrive with clarity. They arrive as weight, as an inner pressure that follows us into ordinary moments, into silence, into prayer, into the spaces where no one is watching. Bonhoeffer understood that faith often speaks most clearly when it withdraws comfort, when it leaves us alone with responsibility instead of reassurance. The question he leaves behind is not whether we admire his courage, but whether we recognize the same quiet crossroads in our own lives. The place where obedience whispers instead of shouts. The place where the cost is real and avoidance suddenly feels like betrayal. And now, the journey does not end. It turns inward. If something in you was stirred, unsettled, or gently disturbed, do not rush past it. Stay with it. Give it room to speak. If this reflection resonated, let it find voice through you. Share it with someone who needs silence more than noise. Leave a thought, a question, a hesitation in the comments. Not to conclude the conversation, but to keep it alive. And if you feel drawn to continue walking this path of deeper faith, quiet courage, and uncomfortable truth, then remain here. Subscribe, not as a habit, but as a commitment to keep listening when faith refuses to be easy.